This is Sarah from sarayip.com, Facebook The Numbers Queen, and sarayip1111 on Instagram. Really special guest today, Gary Nunn, author of The Psychic Test, a book that's just come out. Now, actually, Gary, one thing I wanted to ask you is, can you shift a little bit to your left, just the way that the film gets cropped? Yep, that would be amazing.
Sure.
Thanks so much.
Move my microphone over.
Gary, how do you like to introduce yourself and what you do?
Well, I would describe myself as a storyteller, and the way that manifests is I am a human interests journalist. So I tend to tell stories that are perhaps a step back from the news story. So it might be hooked into a news event, but the step back will go into the people behind that story and the emotions behind that story. And that's my job. And I'm a freelance journalist, and I write for The Guardian, the BBC, the Sydney Morning Herald, and the Australian Women's Weekly, and the ABC, amongst others.
So all the big ones.
Yeah.
Just tick, tick.
I'm a numbers queen too.
Well, you're obviously a high flyer. I can respect that. So how did we meet? We met by me picking up this book and going, wow, this is a really amazing book. It's actually quite a confronting read, because it talks about the world of psychics and whether we are for real. And that's pretty interesting, given that's one of, well, my main occupations at this point in time. And so here I am talking to you, slightly nervous, but of course you would think if I was psychic, I should know how it's going to go. And all I can say is it really...
Oh, yeah, that old chestnut.
It really piqued my interest, because before I ever called myself a psychic, I am a scientist. I worked for government, the United Nations, all the top charities, highly academic, and consider my head very firmly screwed onto my shoulders. Actually, I did 1,000 readings for under $100 to begin my career, and then I did 2,000 readings before I called myself a psychic. So I also didn't really believe
wow.
it was for real. However, I'm now over the line. And I guess what I liked about your book is I feel that it will help people on both sides. So I was interested, Gary, what was the main reason that you wrote this book? Can you still hear me? Looks like the internet's just gone down. That's interesting. Hang on one sec.
What was the main reason I wrote this book? You froze ever so slightly there, but you're back now. And I did catch that. What was the main reason I wrote this book? Yeah, two reasons. Number one was my younger sister, Taryn, who was very, very into psychics, and self-defined as a believer. And she would often drag me along to come and see all these psychics with her, and I just used to poke fun at her about it, and in my heart of hearts didn't believe. And so she was kind of obsessed with them, and we'd have a laugh when we'd go along to see one together, although I could sense that she was taking it a bit more seriously than me and my cousin were, when the three of us are really close. So we'd go together, me and my cousin were laughing, but my sister wasn't always in on the joke. Then that grew a lot darker in 2015 when our dad died suddenly, and at that point my sister sought out the services of various different mediums. She's seen at least 10 in her life that she can remember, and those mediums were purporting to bring our late father back into the room with her. So all the while they were doing that, he wasn't really dead, because they were saying, he's here, what do you want to say to him? And when someone dies suddenly, if anyone's experienced a grief of a death that was highly unexpected and very sudden, you're sometimes left with questions that will forever remain unanswered and have to remain unanswered. And she wanted them answered, and that was part of her grief. And it was sad, really. And I grew concerned at that point that the mediums were accepting money from my sister, who doesn't know much money, who, spends her money wisely and all that kind of thing. She's not a spendthrift, and grew concerned that they were suspending her in the bargaining or denial phase of grief. And therefore she wasn't moving on to those next phases, which is really essential for grief, where you sort of freeze frame yourself in a position and you keep going back. So that was number one. And number two was, as a journalist for the Sydney Morning Herald, I reported on the biggest stockbroking firm collapse since the global financial crisis, and that the executive chairman of that stockbroking firm, his name is Glenn Rosewall. Yeah. He had hired and paid a psychic to advise him on basically how to run the stockbroking firm. So he had asked her for spiritual guidance on where to invest stocks and shares. Yeah. And so I thought that was extraordinary. Although when I looked it up, it's actually not as extraordinary as you'd think. He's not an outlier. There is a astrological and spiritual realm to stocks and shares and that side of business, which I cover in the first couple of chapters of the book. And what did surprise me was the HR decisions. So he was asking this psychic on who to hire and who to fire. Yeah. Who to fire based on her psychic advice. So that I thought was extraordinary. And then went on to discover those recruitment HR kind of decisions, again, not extraordinary, because my own former manager at a major children's charity in the UK recruits into her team based on star sign fit and compatibility with other team members. So again, I the things that I thought were outliers and extraordinary weren't necessarily. So anyway, that stockbroking firm, after being run that way for 4 years, it went bust. And when it collapsed, $61 million was owed to 6,000 clients. And there was a liquidator's report, and he was put on the dock. And the psychic, who's called Naveen Rottinger, she was called in as a witness. So I reported on that story, and the reason for the book and how those two sort of stories collide is that I am quite transparent in the book that I previously had considered anyone who takes psychics seriously as perhaps vulnerable and fragile, almost always actually, and missing something in their lives. But I think I'd also made value judgments on those people, and I had been dismissive and patronizing of them and thought of them as gullible and naive and maybe even foolish. And he challenged that assumption, because he wasn't any of those things. He was powerful and authoritative and responsible for millions of dollars and hundreds of staff. So the book starts with me and my sister going to see this ancient psychic called Iris, and we start the journey. I am the voice of the skeptic in the book, and my sister is the voice of the believer in the book, and we go through that journey together so that I can kind of cover. We think it's the first book of its kind to cover both believer and skeptic and talk to them with equal credence. And what I will say in the book is that we step into each other's worlds a little bit. So she comes over to my side and I go over to her side. I become less dismissive and patronizing, and she hires a grief counselor who isn't a medium, who is from the terrestrial world rather than the celestial world. So anyway, that's a teaser rather than the spoiler for what happens in the book.
You know what? It's clear from how you describe it that this was really an act of love. It was like a type of almost love letter, perhaps, to a part of yourself or a part of your sister that really needed the right type of comfort. And I could really pick that up from your book. And of course, we're probably not going to agree on some of the content of the book, as you can imagine. But I can really respect what you've done here, because you've put in a lot of effort to listen to people, which of course would be partly from your journalist training and probably from a life where perhaps you've been marginalized or not listened to. So for that reason, yes, like I wanted to talk to you and introduce you to my people. So thank you so much. That was a really good way to describe it. There's just it's just a book that you can't put down. I definitely read it in a couple of nights, which was a pretty big ask given I've got 3 kids and a business. But it's one of those books that you just have to know sort of what dodgy thing happens next. And I have no doubt you'll probably end up making some movies or films with some of your work, which would be pretty cool. So I've just got a few other things. I have actually reviewed your book, and I was hoping to just read a little bit of what I wrote about it, if that's okay. I'm just going to grab that.
Yeah, sure.
So let me just find it. And I can absolutely correlate what you're saying because I have been through it myself. When I first got into this stuff and I had my hand read, I remember mocking the people who did it. I remember one of them said, "You will leave your government job. You will leave your work as a park ranger to become a spiritual teacher within 3 to 5 years." And I thought he was a total idiot. I told him, this was Manfred in Darwin. Anyway, 3 to 5 years later, I went back and apologized because I had changed career, which I never saw coming. Whether it was self-fulfilling prophecy, we may never know. But it was funny because he said, "Oh, no big deal, happens all the time." And so that also made me think there was that sort of counseling element. He was very sort of, there was a real generous energy there. I've also almost been defrauded by psychics many times, actually. In fact, it's probably what made my ability grow as quickly as it did. When I first got my hands read in San Francisco, someone asked me for $10,000 US upfront to remove a curse from my mother. And because she had told me some very accurate things about me, whether it was cold reading or intuition, I was very tempted to give her my bank details because I was in a bad place.
Wow.
However,
Wow.
I asked my partner about it and he just said, "What are you doing?" And that's where, if you are a lonely person and in a bad place, yes, I do think there are some people who call themselves psychics where bad things can happen, whether you believe that's karma, fate, or destiny. I do believe you, Gary, because I have been there many times. I remember meeting another, and again, I say purported psychic because some people call themselves an actor after doing a Christmas play, and some people call themselves an actor after winning an Emmy, right?
Yeah, I called myself a journalist after my first Guardian article. I wasn't really.
Right. So, I call myself a psychic after 2,000 readings with getting pages of feedback, documentation, video recordings, everything. That's when I started using the word. Not everyone is like that. I've met psychics where they were so charming. I went to their house. There was some really weird stuff. And later on, I found out they were kind of like predators. And that's really
it's so interesting that you're so candid about being almost tempted to part with $10,000 to remove a curse from your mother. I mean, that is so sinister because it really is playing on that filial bond, and who would want their mother to be cursed? You would do anything, and we'd do anything for our mums.
You would. And do you know how I got out of it, Gary? I got out of it because a little part of me went, something's going on here. As much as I'm scientifically and academically trained, I was in a bad place and I was by myself in a foreign country. So I asked to read her hand because she could read hands and so could I. So I read her hand and I immediately saw a formation for someone who is able to bend the truth. And
where was she based?
San Francisco.
She was in San Francisco. You did say that.
So as soon as I saw that line, I actually immediately went, but no.
Yeah.
And so for me, learning some of what at the time they did was actually a type of psychic, like self-defense. And I was able to then have a conversation, and she ended up showing me pictures of her boyfriend saying, "Do you think he's my soulmate?" So I was able to turn around.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, it's difficult to pick a soulmate for someone that wants to extort money from others. You'd have to have a soul first. The thing is, I think that's very interesting. There is a section of my book where I talk about this, and there's
it's really interesting, Gary, and I think it's worth people reading that because, like I said, just because someone calls himself a psychic doesn't mean they have the ability and the ethics. For example, you can call yourself a massage therapist and you could have almost no training. It could be a weekend workshop, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
A lot of these industries, it's almost like you have to be psychic to find a proper psychic.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. 100%. I mean, I do one exercise class and call myself an exercise instructor. No, I don't really. Just there's a lot of hubris that goes on. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's read. If it's okay, I'll just jump into my review. It's not very long. Okay, so The Psychic Test by Gary Nunn. It's an investigation of psychics and skeptics in the Australian New Age industry. discuss as many people I've met or worked with. I know most of the people in your book. That was kind of startling for me, because at one point I'm like, oh God, please don't mention me. And then I thought, well, I'll just, introduce.
Do you go to Mind, Body, Spirit?
Yes, I've talked at Mind, Body, Spirit.
Yeah. Do you have a stall there, or do you go there?
I did have a stall there. I worked in the reading room. That's where I cut my teeth as a reader while I was still working as a full-time fundraiser. I used to do palm readings on the weekend. And then at a certain point, I did run a stall there. And then I chose to take it private because, to be honest, I've got a very introverted energy and I have a certain type of clientele, and a lot of them really want something that's quite deep. And I found it quite stressful to be among so many people who are all trying to get answers, that the tension was really palpable.
Yeah, it's busy. Mm-hmm.
So here's what I got from your book. I got a bird's eye view of how vulnerable clients can feel coming in for mediumship, tarot and astrology readings. And I specifically talk about that, Gary, because I do palmistry and numerology. Numerology particularly is a little bit different. I got an understanding of the techniques fake psychics use. I got a lot of wow moments, learning about the extent of psychics' positive and negative influence in politics, TV, Hollywood, the police, and the business sectors. I thought it was fantastic that you went there. There's a lot of people who would be too afraid to ask those questions. You obviously have some sort of protection because you could so definitely have ruffled some feathers doing what you did. I don't know. I feel like you've got some sort of shield up, because the stuff that you got away with.
Do you mean like ruffling?
It's pretty amazing.
Ruffling feathers amongst psychics or amongst the police, or
all of them? You went in there amongst like all the people. You just went straight for it, and that's something I like. It's good. It's good stuff. And again, I can correlate what you did because I have political people on my books, actors, Hollywood people, all these people I've read for some of the very top, richest people in Australia. I can correlate all of it.
Who? Tell us who.
So let me explain. This has actually bugged the hell out of me because obviously I'm a really upfront person. You probably figured that out. And I'm like, come on, if you use me, at least, give me some feedback or let me use your name, because it just doesn't feel right. I don't want to be like your on the side thing. I'm not like a fling. And then what they say to me is, I would love to do that, but I will lose all my sponsors. I would love to do that, but I could lose my business. I would love to do that, but maybe my partner will judge me. So then, Gary, there's pressure at all levels to keep the use of psychics under wraps, but I have openly talked about it on my blog so many times. But yes, I just wanted to totally correlate that from an maybe insider's perspective. I got a lot of emotional healing from the stories you talked about. What I found really confronting about your book, the thing that really hurt my heart, was the psychics who made the predictions about the missing children, and then the parents dying thinking the children were dead when some of the children were alive. That's really hard to read because obviously I have very young children. And yet at the same time, I think it's an important thing that you've talked about, because yes, there are people who do this. However, I would suspect there's not a lot of psychics who would do that type of work. It almost goes against the grain of why you would become a psychic. A lot of people do it because they themselves are looking for answers and have come from a background of trauma. I would think for the most part, most psychics maybe avoid the spotlight, and that's the type of thing you have to think. Although you're pretty certain to do that type of work.
Yeah, there were 1,000 psychics that contacted Madeleine McCann's family, so that's not a small number. 1,000. That's a lot.
There's millions of psychics.
Yeah, but 1,000 when your child is missing, that's pretty harrowing. You've got a lot to deal with.
It's true. And you know what I would say to you? A lot of them won't be professional psychics. Some of those will be, a lot of those will have mental illness and things like that. A lot of people think they are psychic. Unfortunately, it's a very fine line. As you might know, schizophrenia has some of the same signs. So actually recently I've been working on a book manuscript, and I showed it to an editor, and he said, if you publish this, journalists will tell you that you're schizophrenic. So I went to a psychologist, very reputable, over many months, and I now have an assessment that I'm not schizophrenic.
Well, the thing is, without going too deep, madness is so close to knowledge, isn't it? Like that's why I talk about the Shakespearean fool in my book, because the Shakespearean fool was dismissed as mad, or a word like we use schizophrenic today, or we might use a number of different other words that denote mental health illness. But the fool owned their madness and their foolishness and spoke coded truths. And like there is a strand of thought that just because you deviate from, just because you're neurodiverse doesn't necessarily mean that your contribution isn't worthwhile. So I think that there's an interesting strand there as well, you know, in terms of just honouring and respecting the contribution that people who are neurodiverse make.
Yeah, you've got very strong intuition, don't you? So in the process of getting diagnosed as not schizophrenic, which was a relief, I also got diagnosed as neurodiverse.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I've actually written quite heavily about the fact that I believe there is an overlap between neurodiverse people and so-called psychics, because, for example, I'm a pattern seeker. You can give me a Excel spreadsheet of thousands of lines of data and I can spot the error. So okay. I'm able to look at people's body language, or whether you call it their energy fields, and I'm like, you're holding energy there. There's an issue there. There's something here you're not talking about. So it's all about processing speed. And I think you touched upon that in the book, is that hyper-perception. And I think it's true. Some people, their intuition, it's like two tin cans and a piece of string trying to talk to themselves and their heart. And perhaps for some people who have done a lot of work or, you know, practice, it's more like a mobile phone. It's really quick.
Yeah.
So, I found that really hard to read about, but I think it's important, and I'm glad you put it in the book. I loved, but found it, again, challenging to read the thing about the skeptics and how they get punched out when they go to the mind, body, spirit. I think that was probably the most entertaining thing I have read, where you said you often think about Richard Saunders trying not to get punched when he walks around the workshops. I don't know why, but I found that really great. Not that I wanted to get
I think I know why.
I never really thought about the danger that they actually go through. And look, he's got a
well, you saw that with Sally. You saw that with Sally Morgan's husband in the UK when the UK skeptics were flying Sally Morgan's shows, and you saw that there was threats of violence from her husband in the UK, and homophobic abuse towards one of the skeptics, who obviously was he perceived to be gay, and it can get it can get heated.
Really personal. Look, my husband wouldn't do that. However, I must say I have worked with a lot of psychics, and there's definitely that gypsy element, that bohemian element. And actually, it's not uncommon for psychic women to have quite strongly masculine spouses. In fact, I often see psychics finish a festival and get on like a Harley with their husband full of tats. So, I think there's something there about yin and yang. But yeah, that really opened my eyes. I found your talking about being gay in a homophobic society was really relevant, because in a way, it's like if you knew someone was going to ostracize you if you were gay, why would you talk about your sexuality? I think spirituality, there's a similarity. I have been very sensitive since I was young. However, I was religious, etc., and scientific. So I didn't talk about it. And so it didn't develop. And a lot of it manifested as just anxiety and fear of myself and my own abilities. My very first palm reading in high school, when I first learned all this, I read my best friend's hand, and I noted that it looked very similar to this other guy who was bisexual. So this is what I said to my friend on my first palm reading. I said, wow, it looks like this guy's, and he's bisexual. But I said, but of course that's not you, because this is my best friend who I've known for like forever and is definitely straight. And he actually says, wow, I've never told anyone this, but I'm bi. That was my first palm reading. And that's why immediately I started to treat this work as very sacred, whether you believe it's psychic or counseling. And I made sure I went and got training. So I do have training as a counselor. Because, I mean, you as a journalist have similar things, right? People just tell you things they've never told anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, they do. Yeah.
Do journalists get counselling training?
It's getting better. There's a centre called the Dart Centre that helps journalists who report in very traumatic places. And then there are people like Sally Sarah, who was the ABC's foreign correspondent, who talk about their breakdowns from trauma overload and then write plays about it. She did a play called Stop Girl about her time as the ABC's foreign correspondent and the need for better trauma processing and training and counselling for journalists. But I put myself on the Walkleys. I won a place on the Walkleys Our Watch Fellowship, which was training journalists to better report on violence against women and domestic violence. And through that, we all got, because we were then going out into the world and reporting those stories, harrowing and infuriating stories. So sometimes it's not just the trauma, it's the anger that you have towards the people who are perpetrators. So through that we learned some techniques and we had a group. And so in short, in answer to your question, like it depends. Like I'm freelance, so if you're in-house, there are access to some debriefing resources, but they're only just starting to get better at that now, because normally they'd rather just have you chasing your next story.
Yeah, look, to be totally honest, there's definitely some parallels between our types of industries. There's a lot of people who perhaps have, their heart in the right place, but they probably need ongoing support, which may not always be possible financially and just like structurally. So it's interesting that you've chosen this industry to look at. So a couple more things I noticed in your book, realizing that a lot of the media promotes psychics because they're popular, not necessarily because they're accurate. I hadn't really picked that up when you talked about the statistics of how, successful the astrology columns and stuff are. And that's why I advertise, like they want psychics. I was like, wow, hadn't thought of it like that. It's a really good point. And like I said, I really had to look at my own practice. Actually, you talk quite a bit about money in your book. I thought that was interesting. You talk about how some psychics charge $500 or $300, some charge $30 or nothing. This is a topic I've had to really think about, because as a fundraiser, I know that asking for money is in itself a type of inspiration. Some people actually, they have to really grow when you ask them for large sums of money. Now, I think the people that you saw in this book mainly charged on the lowest scale. Is that right?
Some charge 30 and some charge, I've gone off screen a bit. Some charge 30 and some charge like 300.
I think that was Debbie, right? Because you write about her in the book. And
yeah.
You mentioned her in a couple of your interviews.
Yeah.
Look, all I can say is it seems to depend, I think, on the psychic's background. The psychics who have a business background or are a bit older, or who are parents, for example, people like me, we do charge a lot more.
Yeah.
Probably because we want to work with people who are more in that professional sphere. Often they'll be doing things like career change readings and stuff that perhaps is more what we want to do.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to mention that. Anyway, thanks for listening. So you've given me your date of birth, which I'm grateful for. And based on that, you have a number 31/4 life path, which means you're doing a lot of healing of your heart in this lifetime in numerology. And it also means you're healing a lot of other people's hearts. And what I liked about your book, Gary, is I feel that whether you're a skeptic or a psychic, you would read this book and go back in and be like, okay, let's have another go, but let's keep our eyes open and let's see what we can learn. So I felt that, like, honestly, there's a lot of love in this book behind the words. I don't know if other people would say it like that.
Yeah, I think so.
So can I ask, did you have some changes around the ages of 31? Because in numerology, our life path is also thought to be a bit of a turning point.
31 was when I had started to settle into Australia, and I'd moved to Australia at age 29, and had made and moved in a La Nina year, so it had rained a lot, and I moved here partly to get better weather than we had in Britain, and wasn't delivered that, so I had to. Therefore, it forced me actually to connect with people in a different way and make friends in a different way, and it was one of those times in my life I was vulnerable and I had to draw upon my resilience. Anyway, by 31, the sun had come out in Australia, and I had pivoted from wanting to not stay here and wanting to either move back or move somewhere else, to settling down here. I mean, I've lived here 10 years in January, and I'd only come here for 2 years maximum, and I was absolutely sure of that, as I've been sure of anything in my life, and I was wrong. 31 was the age when I exhaled in Australia and started to think that maybe I would stay here longer than I had told everyone that I would.
Wow. Well, so I have done your chart, which obviously we're keeping private, but I had a bit of a sticky beak, and so there's a lot of change in your chart at exactly 20. Oops, sorry, just a sec. Looks like I need to plug. Just give me one tick.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, all good. Okay, just adjusting. Okay, so yeah, in your chart at 29, there's a huge achievement where basically you listen to your intuition. 31, 32, 33, huge new beginnings. 33, very difficult time, which I believe is also around that time when your father passed. What's interesting in your chart is at 39, again, there's a huge achievement on the same scale as when you were 29. And of course, you've just published your first book. Hang on, I think the connection might have stalled. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I did. Yeah, I caught all that. 39, I published my first book.
Great. And so there's this flowering that's happening. And in your chart, there's then huge changes at 41, 42, which actually, looking at your name, it suggests that some of your greatest work, perhaps writing, will be around that 42 mark, and that it will be quite a risk. It's almost like you go out on a limb at that point. So I believe, Gary, that I'm meeting you at a bit of a leap moment in your life. It's like there's this growing confidence, and I think it'll be fun to watch what you do next. It's like you've sort of just grown wings, and it's like so many things are possible now.
Oh, well, that sounds exciting.
Well, I think life is worth living, otherwise I couldn't possibly do the job I do. So a lot of people with your life path, they are healing around their father. That's actually a really common one. And they often are like spiritual tradies. So they get in there, they do the job, and they keep it really clean and really practical. Would you consider yourself a pretty practical person?
Would I consider myself a practical person? Sometimes. Depends how much coffee I've had.
You're hilarious. Well, actually, your chart also suggests that you do tend to run on adrenaline, and are still learning to master the whole looking after a human body thing. Hang on, sorry, it's starting to cut out. Perhaps both of us need to go soon. Maybe the baby needs a breastfeed. He tends to zap my internet when he needs a feed.
Oh, no, I did hear that. Yes, I do run on adrenaline, and yeah, I try to look after my body, but we all have blips there.
Sometimes it takes a team. Just like a race car, we need a pit crew. Okay, so the way I'd sum up your book, it's really funny, it's well written and researched, it's full of mystery shopper insights. I mean, to me, it was almost like you mystery shopped all my colleagues in this book. It really blends some really interesting social justice themes into the discussion. Now, I'm not sure, can you still hear me? My internet keeps going in and out.
Yeah, I can hear you.
The baby's crying, which is probably why the internet's going crazy.
Oh.
Usually he starts crying and the whole thing just goes down. He's got a strong energy, that child. So I wanted to read out a couple of things in your book. Is that okay? Just like a couple of lines?
Yeah, sure.
All right, you let me know. You're the author. So you interviewed an ex-astrologer, which is quite interesting. And she said, women throughout history have been excluded from prestige spiritual staff, rabbis and priests. Then they're derided for taking up a different form of spirituality. This is the first time they're allowed into a spiritual tradition and to have a voice and be listened to, and it's unfair to ridicule them. I felt that seemed to be related to your work around ending domestic violence and violence against women, because violence against women is violence against sensitive people who are more feelings run. So was that a real eye-opener when you met that person?
Yes, it was, because it made me less supercilious towards people who have found empowerment within this spiritual realm, because we give a lot of respect and gravitas, and sometimes I will be controversial and say not always deserved, to people in the other spiritual realm, which is people of faith, and
Yeah,
they can.
I was impressed that you went there. I think it's a really valid point, Gary, and I think that's why I was a bit shocked because that's a bit of a sacred whatever that word is, sacred lamb or something. But you
Yeah,
went there. You went there.
I went there. Yeah, and but then I do also in my interview, because the book is just a starting point. The book is just the starting point of the conversation. That's step one of a 10-step conversation, and we've been having steps 2 and 3 through the media, because the media's just rolled out and out and out, and things like this. And what I've been saying in step 2 and 3 of this conversation is that when I go into a church as an atheist, I derive a lot of comfort and consolement from sitting somewhere that's quiet and encouraging me to contemplate. And that's often a church. And in one of the churches that I went into on Macquarie Street in Sydney, just opposite the New South Wales Parliament, there's a sign on the back of the pew saying, "Please pray for others before you pray for yourself." And I thought that's what faith is and should be about, and it always hasn't been about. But like, for a lot of people of faith, that is still number one for them. And I make the point that in all of my gonzo research, I never once went to a psychic and said, "Look, my mate Dave's having a really tough time. Can you tell me what's in store for Dave's future?" It was all about me. And that's partly me, that's partly on the client side. That's I had free will. I could have asked them that, and faith teaches me that. So as a secular person, I still derive lessons from faith. And as a non-believer, what my sister and what the believers and the psychics that I spoke to have shown me is that I can still derive value, and I can still see the value that others derive from this spiritual realm, the psychic realm. So I kind of applied the same lessons.
So in a way, you've become more bilingual.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happened. Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether I believe in it. That doesn't matter. That's that's one of the wrong questions. People want to know what I think. What I think is unimportant about myself and about my own personal belief. I think that's unimportant. What I think is important is what other people believe and what they get from it. Because if you say, "Oh, I'm a skeptic," then you close down that conversation so quickly that you become dismissive and you don't hear people's stories. And that's the whole point of the book.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to wind up, but there's a quote that was playing in my head before this interview with you. A closed mind is like a closed book, just a lump of wood. And what I like about this lump of wood is it does encourage you to turn over a new leaf and at least consider the other points of view. And the world really needs that right now. Really needs people who are willing to just stop and be with someone who is battling, a similar battle, but with a different faction. That's I guess why I've also wanted to talk to you on my blog, even though part of me was like, this is going to be terrifying.
It's because it's easy to laugh, especially for me. It's always easy to laugh. It's always easy to laugh at someone. That's always easy. It's easy to criticize, and what's not so easy is to hear someone with an open mind and to put your own prejudices, and even if even if it's a science-led worldview, is to put that to one side and go, right now in this moment, being present in this moment, none of that matters, because what does that person get from this? Is it helping them or healing them? That's what matters. And
well, you're starting to speak a little bit like a mystic now. It's a quite beautiful conversation. Look, all I can say is I have had all the scientific and academic training. I'm in the top 1% of my cohort when I graduated, and like I said, it's taken me several years to get to the point where I believe in this stuff. And I was pleased to see this book. I wish it had come out earlier, actually, it probably would have saved me a lot of stress, but it's come out at the perfect time for itself. And honestly, with COVID, a lot more people are meditating, a lot more people are seeing psychics. And I think you'll find, yeah, the timing is really ripe. So we're starting to wind up. If someone was going to see a psychic and they were a little bit nervous, what would you say to them? Like, are there a couple of tips you would give them? Because obviously there are tips I would give them, but I'm very interested to know what tips you would give them.
If you're a skeptic, and this is one of the quotes in my book that I love the most is Ray Hyman, who says, "I've never, let me get it right. I've never once met a proponent of the paranormal who does not start their conversation with, 'I'm a skeptic too.'" Almost everyone says they're a skeptic. Even I think the only person in the world who I know that didn't was my sister. But like, and psychics themselves. But even some psychics like Sharina Starr will start her conversation when you meet her saying, "I'm a skeptic." So yeah, Ray Hyman, who says, "I've never met a proponent of the paranormal who does not start their conversation with, 'I'm a skeptic too.'" And always question and be skeptical about their skepticism is what he taught me. Like, always question that, because they may have what the skeptics would perceive to be a blind spot. But what I no longer, I know what they mean by that, but since writing the book, I no longer call it that. They may have a strand of belief that they fear that if they're honest about it would call into question their decision making or their credibility in their job if they're quite high up. Anyway, if you're a skeptic and you have a skeptical strand, I would say be willing to suspend your disbelief. Hang up your skeptical cloak just for an hour. Suspend your disbelief, indulge your cognitive dissonance. And it comes back down to this. And this really is the crux of it for me. Things don't need to be true for us to find truth. And that's why we read fiction. And that's why we watch films and great TV shows. And that's why Hollywood is such a huge business, because storytelling, whether true or not, can help us find deeper truths within ourselves. And this could be a chance for you to spend an hour just reflecting on your own life and maybe other people's lives as well that you love and care about. And to just give some thought and contemplation to those, and that person sat opposite you, whether you believe they've got whether they are a medium into the spiritual world or they can see into the future, it almost doesn't matter, because it's encouraging you to think more deeply. And then on a practical level, I would just say shop around, because Janie in Byron Bay costs $30. And
your other interview, I saw that.
Yeah, so whereas Debbie Malone will cost $300, that's 10 times more. And I sent out a bunch of.
Did you see my prices?
No, I didn't see your prices.
They're considerably more than Debbie Malone's.
Okay, on, that's a lot.
I'm talking to you. So I started my business doing $10, $15 readings. And I got really sick, really, really sick, because whenever I do anything, I do it 110%. I don't think that's mathematically possible, but you understand.
Yeah.
And so, I quickly realized I could only do a small handful of readings. So you do mention a psychic like that in this book, really sensitive person. And then I've got a family of 5, and I've got a community of 150 students I'm subsidizing to learn spirituality at a really affordable price. So I charge the very top, probably one of the top prices in Australia. And I guess what I wanted to say to you is, before you judge the water usage, look at the size of the garden.
Yeah, that's also important. Yeah, especially if you've got a strand of belief running through you, that would be really important to you. But for me, someone like Janie is the same as someone like Debbie Malone for me, because they're doing the same thing. They are sat opposite me and encouraging me to think about my own romantic, professional, and social future. And what they say is kind of as relevant as the hour in which they've given me to reflect, and they've gifted me that, and I'm paying them for that. So, and the only other thing I would say is, if you're feeling very fragile and there's a big gap in your life and you're feeling a bit vulnerable, just be careful. Just be careful. And maybe in that situation, don't suspend your disbelief. Maybe in that situation, speak to your friends and tell them what you're thinking of doing, and they might have someone very sensitive who's trained as a counsellor as you are in mind. And I would say, if you're very, very vulnerable, then probably see a counsellor first and then go and see a psychic and consider that that's probably the best thing for your mental health. However, having said that,
I would
yeah,
really
people,
agree with you there, Gary.
yeah,
And, you know, as you mentioned in the book, which I thought was really valid, a professional psychic, one who's had years of training and lots of experience, they will turn you down. I'll turn down someone who's just had the breakup, who's just, you know, lost the person, because it's going to be very hard for me to tune in, very hard for them to sit still. And there's just a natural process that needs to be respected. So
Yeah.
there is a level of ethics that I wish there was more of in the industry, but I do believe it's getting stronger with online reviews and books like this, and more scrutiny and more people coming in as clients who are quite intelligent, you know. So it's happening, Gary. And, you know, all I can say is if more people come in as a result of this book and they lift the standards of the industry, that can only be a good thing. Oops, screen's just.
Yeah, I agree with that.
just about to
Yeah.
break up.
I agree with that. Yeah, and one of the things, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, great. And one of the things I talk about in the book is capturing people where they're at in terms of their mental health. And if that's where they're at and that's what they want to go and do, then let's meet them there.
And also encourage them to go to someone who is truthful in their marketing, has extra qualifications, has lots of reviews that are diverse reviews, not just the same review copy pasted. There's things people can do to protect themselves. Also, always keeping a recording of the reading. All my readings are video and audio recorded, because I just think sometimes that alone is going to assure you a different type of reading or a different type of reader.
100%. Yeah.
I wanted to finish out with something I thought was kind of sweet about your name. I analyze names as part of my business names, personal names. So I thought it was cool because Gary is actually associated with the word spear, and then Nun
That's
is
right.
associated with nuns, monks, and mystics. So you are like this spiritual warrior, or this, you know, like a monk with a sword. And of course, sword is an anagram of words, and monks were highly literate. So I just wanted to end with that because it was amusing that you have written this book, The Psychic Tests, and your name actually means like this mystic with a weapon, and they're not afraid to use it.
I love that for me.
Well, in the end, I mean, I believe in past lives. I know not everyone does, but I think a lot of the people who used to slay in battle, they slay on Instagram now. Like they're out there and they're just skewering people with a couple of pithy quotes. So all I'm suggesting is, you know, they call it a writer because you can write justice with it if you choose to. And I think you've done some good justice to the industry, Gary. As I mentioned, I don't agree with everything you've said, but it's a whopper of a book and it's worth reading. And thank you for the amount of energy you've put into it.
Thank you.
I hope that our paths will cross again. I think the connection is on and off. Can you hear me?
Oh, you're welcome. You froze a little bit then, but I thank you for the energy you put into it. You're very welcome. Thank you for reading it.
No worries. Okay, well, this is Sarah from sarayup.com, Facebook, The Numbers Queen, and Sarayup1111 on Instagram with Gary Nunn, journalist and mystic with a sword who's not afraid to use it. Thanks so much, Gary. I'll see you next time.
Very welcome. Great to chat to you.